Thank you so much, both of you, for the introduction and for having me. I'm really excited and honored to be a part of this conversation. I quite honestly, I'm a financial wellness coach, and so this is a topic that's obviously near and dear to my heart. Um, and I've been in finance for a little over 23 years. And so it's funny just how no matter what role of finance I've been in, what kind of client I've been working with or talking to, how all these years later, a budget is still a very relevant topic. A little bit of the housekeeping here. First of all, I'm glad Jesse said something about everybody being welcome in age, and I consider myself young, even if I may not be. So I appreciate being included in being welcomed in this series. But also, um, Jesse made it very important that I knew. Not to talk about the Cowboys. I'm from Dallas, and that's where I'm located, and so I'm gonna leave that alone. But I will also tell you, not everybody in Dallas is a Cowboys fan, so don't hate me too much. But I appreciate you guys joining today, and hopefully this is an enriching conversation, especially as you look at it in the context of the fact that there's going to be more, and so I always, anytime I start talking about a budget, there's kind of a good context to keep in mind that this is always with a purpose and there's always more to come following it, right? And so what we're going to talk today about are just kind of some suggestions in thinking about how you structure that budget, have a little bit of a conversation about what different types of expenses look like, and maybe how you might want to think about prioritizing some of those things. And then just ways to stay on top of a budget, tracking your expenses. And we'll talk about this more, but tracking your expenses is a big part of making a budget work. Um, we're not all in a room, but if we were all in the same room right now, I would say, quick show of hands, how many of you have ever sat down, created a budget, kind of made it look nice and pretty, and within a few months, it kind of up on a shelf somewhere and kind of forgot about it, right? Um, a a big piece of making a budget work is monitoring where you're at through the month, so you're taking the guesswork out and you're putting some structure to it that really kind of reinforces the habit of budgeting. And so we'll talk about that, but tracking your money is really good way to achieve that. And then the toward the end, we're going to do some breakouts and give you guys a chance to talk a little bit about some things. We're going to try to make this interactive and throw some polls in there. So when you see some polls pop up, please let us know where you're at in the world. And then we're going to open it up at the end to allow some time to do some Q&A. So questions along the way, if you want to just jot them down, we're not going to necessarily be making stops along the way, but I want to reassure everybody that we will get there. So keep your questions in mind as we go, so that we can talk about those. So why is this important? Right? Like, at the end of the day, budgeting is it seems to be a pretty elementary, basic part of our financial life, right? But the reality is most Americans are still somehow living paycheck to paycheck. And and almost a third of them have less than $100 left over after paying their monthly bills. And so that kind of brings up my question, in this room, how many of you are feeling that way? How many of you feel like there's more month than money? And at the by the end of the month, you're really feeling that squeeze and kind of waiting for that next paycheck. And let me tell you, look, like, we're seeing it right now, right? 6% are not feeling that, 6 to 7%, right? Everybody else is feeling that way, And so when we talk about, even in this room, we've got over 90% feeling like this is kind of rough, right? Like this really kind of hurts. And and so it's a very relevant thing, right? And so that's why it just becomes so important, because I get it too. Like, without a budget, this is this is common. Sometimes it's common even with a budget, right? There are real economic factors we got to deal with. Things like inflation is not made up, right? This is something that we have to kind of figure out. And the increase in income has not kept pace even close with the pace of inflation. And so, some of these issues creating this feeling are very real, but all the more, it reinforces the need to budget to make these finances work. All right. So that's why we're here, right? That's why it's so helpful to talk about a budget, even though it's not necessarily the most fun conversation when we're talking about finances. So this might look a little like, okay, there's a lot of categories here and there's a pretty big range of how much you're recommending to allocate to each thing, right? I think what this says to me is that, and I would definitely tell you guys, I've been doing financial wellness coaching for 5 years and helped a lot of people kind of start building those foundation pieces, including a budget. And I will tell you, part of the challenge in getting started is that there are a lot of different ways to do a budget. None of them are right. None of them are wrong. It really is about finding a system that works best for you. So where I take a slide like this can be a good starting point for those of you who are doing a budget for the first time and really unsure, like, how much should I be expecting for certain things, right? And just understand that, these are some generalities here, right? Like, when we talk about housing and utilities, and this says housing and utilities should only be 20 to 40% of my budget. Well, let's be honest, that's not common for most people, right? Even, the cost of rent or a mortgage in New England, we know that's high in that part of the country, right? Even in Dallas, it's exploded. It's gone way up in recent years. So for everybody in this call, we're probably not in that 40% range. It's probably higher than that, right? So that's okay. This is not saying if you don't fit in these boxes, you're doing something wrong. That's not where I want to go with this, but it can help kind of guide some of the thinking through, like, okay, well, when I think about saving toward a goal, I don't know how much I should even be putting toward that. Well, then this can serve as a good guide. Let's look at about 15 to 5% of your income and start thinking about kind of how you want to structure that, what would work for you, right? And so again, money is tied to the details of our lives, and everybody's life is different, so it's gonna be a little different for every one of you, and that's okay. And that's where I kind of go back to none of this being wrong, none of this being right. It's a little bit of a journey and a process and an exploration to finding out a system that's going to work best for you, and that's totally okay. When we think of the types of expenses, I think that it is really important to kind of understand this, because different things want to get you want to treat things according to, kind of their hierarchy in financial importance. One of the things that can come up in a type of expense is an emergency or an unexpected expense, right? So we've got another polling question for you guys on that one. And I'd like to hear from the group, if something were to come up, are you prepared? Do you have emergency savings in place? And I want to thank everybody for the participation. This is awesome. We're getting good participation out of this. So about half of you actually say you would be prepared for a financial emergency. Definitely give yourself a pat on the back for that. That is not at all in line with the statistics. What the statistics say is that about 70% of Americans would not be prepared for an unexpected expense of $1,000. So, in other words, most Americans are only an unexpected $1,000 hit away from having a pretty substantial financial dilemma, right? And that's scary. So this is kind of driving home, hopefully, expenses are a big part of our life. It's just part of living, right? And you can plan for things, but you can't plan for everything. And so kind of again, think through what can come up and include like the way I see a budget, this is a roadmap. And for those of you who played sports, it's your game plan, right? Like this is kind of what you talk about in the locker room before you go start your month. So first things first, fixed expenses. Whenever I'm starting with a new budget, this is where I start. No matter how it's laid out in the order of a budget template or things like that, I'm starting with fixed expenses because these are kind of these are needs, not wants, right? And these are going to be the same and they're predictable every month. Your mortgage or your rent can change over time, but it's not changing frequently, right? It's a very predictable monthly amount. Same for your car payment, what you're spending on your phone, things like that. When you get into variable expenses, that's kind of where I go next. Variable expenses in a budget, from a budgeting standpoint, this can be where it gets a little tricky and can be hard to know what to put, right? Because these are still needs. These aren't things that are extra, right? You got to eat and you got to keep the lights on. But these aren't predictably exactly the same every month, right? Like I'm never, no matter how much I plan, going to spend exactly the same amount on groceries every month, right? And so it's going to vary a little bit. So you want to kind of think about different strategies of how you approach that. Some people are really good at kind of anticipating, I know exactly what I'm going to be spending. And, I don't really need to think through, um, you know, that much, right? And so if that's you and you know what you spend on groceries every month, great, use it. When I started, and I will talk about this a little bit more later on, but when I started budgeting, I really was unsure on some of these things. Grocery and eating out, those were big things that I had no idea what to put, right? And so if that's you on any of these kinds of things, what I will tell you is tracking your expenses in these categories for a month can really, really help you get an idea of what it's typically going to look like, and so that can help a lot. Then you can use what you learned from tracking those expenses through the previous month and use that information to build your budget. Also, and this is a me thing, right? Again, let's go back to none of this is right or wrong. And what's right for me may not work best for my neighbor. When I am putting in the variable expenses into my budget, something like groceries, I'm going with a max allocation. Like on a heavy, heavy month, I know it's possible that maybe my family is going to spend X amount. in groceries, right? And so I'm putting that in my budget. Now, I might not go there. Most months I don't. Most months I'm not going to spend that full budgeted amount, which is great, right? If I don't, then I have extra money that I wasn't counting on at the end of the month anyway. But if I go all the way up to that max number, I still know that everything else still works. Like I'm not going to be in a financial problem, because we spent that much, because it's part of my budget. And I've kind of anticipated that if it's needed, right? And so um, that's one way you can kind of think about handling variable expenses is put a high top end of that variance into your budget so that on a heavy month it's planned for, it's not hurting the rest of your budget, and you're not having to like kind of pivot in the middle of the month and reallocate things, right? um One way to think about that. Also, while I'm on the topic of groceries, I will also say that sometimes I get questions of like, what is groceries? Is that just food? Because when I go to the store, I'm buying food and cleaning supplies and toothpaste and whatever else, right? And so am I supposed to be splitting all that up, or is it all groceries? And I would throw that back to you to say no right or wrong there. I think the question becomes, how analytical are you and how much do you want to plan? I'm one of those people. I have no desire to dissect a receipt when I come home. So to me, that's all groceries. But if somebody else is feeling like, no, you know what, I actually want to know, like, how much do I need to anticipate spending on cleaning supplies every month? Good for you. Great. Do it. That's certainly not wrong. Um, then you have your periodic expenses, right? These are the things that can come up, and these are important. You don't want to overlook these, because these are those things that, um, while they're not part of your monthly expenses, when they hit, they have the potential to knock the rest of your budget off for the month and really be a problem, right? And so like I've been there for sure, where I'm paying my car insurance twice a year, and that payment comes and it's been 6 months and I haven't thought about it since, and then all of a sudden, it's I've got a big check to write that, oops, right? And so you don't want to be in that kind of a position. And so to protect yourself against that, at least you want to be thinking about putting this into your budget on those months that these are coming, and have the awareness that it's coming, right? Another thing to think about though is I don't like that, right? I don't want to be in that position of having to like really be sure I'm paying attention and that I'm going to have an extra 600 or whatever it is when this bill comes due. So I make it part of my monthly budget, right? I'm going to take that 6 month bill and I'm going to break it into a monthly number, and I'm just shoving that monthly number aside into a savings account. So when that bill comes due, it's there, right? I've been paying that every month, and it's not some big shock to the system. Then I now have this, kind of oddball payment in my budget that's throwing things off and putting me in a bad spot. Another thing is the holidays, right? I don't know how many of you are parents. I've got a couple kids. That changed things astronomically. I thought it would get better as they got a little bit older, and so far that's not the case. My daughter is graduating high school in 2 weeks, and I've got my son is in halfway through high school, and there's holidays, there's getting their first car, there's all these things, right? And so as things start to come, just know that I would really encourage you to think about your budget as a living document, right? That you are constantly um, revisiting and thinking about these expenses. Another good place to start is think about what you need versus what you want. Your first round of a budget should be focused really on, these are the things I need, and I'm leaving the things that I want off of that first round, because what a good budget should be showing you is is the difference between income and expenses, right? So after all of those needs are paid off, you want to know how much cash flow or net income you have to work with to pay for the wants. And the wants need to fit within that number, right? This is where we control going into debt. So this is where you can really take control of the things that you can control and not overspend in areas where it's hurting you. Now, how do you do it, right? What's the best way? Again, no right way, no wrong way. There's a lot of ways to do a budget. Some will advocate for the 50-30-20 budget. The way that looks like is it's just 50% of your budget on a monthly basis should be paying off all the needs. 30% should be going to wants, and you should be putting at least 20% into savings. You know, that's nice. If you can do it, it's great. I have clients who do that. I have done that at times. The challenge there is it's a little aggressive, right? Getting all of your needs within 50% of your budget may not be realistic. That's okay. 70-20-10 budget might be a little bit more realistic, right? Where all of those fixed expenses, needs, those kinds of things are getting covered within the 70%. And then, the remaining 20% is going to savings and investing. But see, this is where you've got living expenses and everything kind of falling in to that 70%, right? Some of the other ways you can do it. The envelope method, you used to hear guys like Dave Ramsey talk about stuff like that. I don't know. I get it. I think that could have been great once upon a time, but who really operates with cash anymore, right? So if you were one of those people, more power to you. But if you're not handling things in cash, envelope system can be a little bit limited. And then, should it be a template or something else? We'll talk about that. I kind of advocate, at least as you get started, to use some kind of a template, and I'll be sharing those. In fact, why don't we go ahead and put those into the chat now? I've added a budgeting template. It's just a simple Excel sheet that everybody can use. Breaks things down into categories really easily and straightforward. Also with that is a spending tracker. So just know I kind of use these hand in hand, and that's usually where I start with most people. Getting things organized in your budget is great, and then you use that tracker to kind of watch where you're at through the month, so that you're not overspending. It's really hard. It's great if I know in my budget that I've allocated, I don't know, let's say $500 a month to eating out, right? But it's hard to keep track of that in my mind throughout the month. And so here we are. What is today? Today's May 21st, 21 days into the month. I don't know what I've spent in restaurants, right? Really, unless I'm tracking it, and so that kind of helps you stick to your budget. So we talked a little bit about the 70-20-10. The calendar method can also be, helpful. I usually use, if I'm going to use a calendar with a client, this is kind of like a spending tracker. It's almost as a supplement to the template. Where this can really be helpful is when, say, there's some challenges in getting coordinated with, I get paid on these days of the month, but I've got these bills that are due, at different times. How do I plan each of my checks to not run out of money, right? And so that can be a really valid concern, especially if like my mortgage is due on the 15th of every month, right? But my pay period is every 2 weeks, right? So the pay structure for me is not that I'm getting paid the same 2 days every month, right? But those bills, like the mortgage, is due at the same time every time. So how do I manage it? Calendars can really be helpful to kind of just visualize those those placements of everything, right? This is when it comes in. This is the check that I've got through this period of my calendar. And then, so that can be helpful as a supplement for sure. You can simplify things, right? There's nothing wrong with making things really drilled down to the details, right? So you might want to say, you know what, I've got my income listed, I've got my living expenses, my wants, and here's what's left over. There's the cash flow, right? Nothing wrong with doing it that way. All right, so now here's a good time to throw another poll at you guys. It's kind of something you guys, I think we're just talking about, but share with the group, do you have a budget now? Okay, um, so far I'm impressed. So about 31% of the group has a budget. The other 2/3 is either no budget or inconsistently, right? I will tell you guys honestly, as I in what I do, I typically meet anywhere between 500 and 600 people a year, and I've been doing that 5 years, right? So it's a lot of people. This is not the averages, right? Most people in all ages of careers, right? And this is everything from fresh out of college to retiring soon. Most people that I meet with, and also regardless of income, do not have a budget. That's often where we need to start. And so for those of you who don't have a budget, I'm glad you're here. And for those of you who do, I'm glad you're here, right? We can always adjust, we can always learn more. So we've got this question here, right? You realize you're over budget halfway through the month. So now what? What are you going to do to adjust? Call grandma, remind her that you're the favorite one. Hope she helps you out, right? Or maybe we're in the world of side gigs and hustles now, right? Maybe you can go find a way to make some quick money, and even if that means selling your brother or your sister's Netflix password, right? Or some of us just white knuckle it, right? I've been there. I had some months like this, especially early on, where we just kind of make it work on ramen noodles and peanut butter and jelly, or you've got this, right? You budgeted for it, so you can relax. That's kind of the point, right? It's keeping yourself from having to be in that spot in the first place, right? So when you find yourself over budget, that's where I would encourage you to make adjustments, right? Get creative, start thinking about other ways of doing things and how you might be able to make it work. Part of the reason that we broke you guys into groups is because I guess it's tied a little bit to a personal story that I'm going to share with you guys. So, like I told you a little earlier, I've been in finance for close to 23 years. I've done a lot of different things within that time. Some of those roles have been in mid-level management. Some of those have been in senior management. I've led some pretty big teams. I've been on my own, right? Just doing my job, not managing anybody. And so with all these different roles and time in the business of finances, here's the truth. I did not have a budget at all until about 5 years ago. So for a long time, with no good excuse in the world and not even practicing what I preached, right? I talked to a lot of people about their money and helped people figure out what their budget could or should look like, but I wasn't doing it myself. I think a big part of the reason why I wasn't doing a budget was because I didn't have any big financial emergencies. There were no fires to put out. The bills got paid. So I kind of felt like, you know, things are fine. I don't need it. It's fine, right? Um, what I learned from that though was that I was missing huge opportunities by not being more intentional and having a little bit more of a plan. I also think that I personally was a little resistant to the idea of a budget because I didn't like the idea of a piece of paper telling me how I'm allowed to spend my money, right? It's mine. I worked for it, right? But I will assure you that I one of the things that I was very, very surprised by having a budget was that I actually have a whole lot more flexibility and freedom with how I spend by having a budget. And that kind of it's counterintuitive, but just trust me there. I think you'll find the same thing after some time of doing things within a budget that you have more money to work with and more freedom to do what you want. Um, but here's where it changed, and this kind of ties back to the groups. I had a good friend that I worked with who was a few months away from retirement and quite a bit older than me. And it just got really, really obvious that he had planned extremely well. And so I was starting to pick his brain a lot. And the nature of our friendship changed into a little bit more of a mentorship. And so I always really appreciated him for this. It's not something he had to do, but we started meeting once a week. We would get coffee and we would talk about finances, and he was mentoring me through things. And on our first cup of coffee, he asked me to tell him about my budget, right? And that was I felt embarrassed to talk about the fact that I don't have a budget at all. And and like I said, I've also come to learn most people don't. But by having this conversation with him and this mentor relationship, here's the truth. He gave me some tips here and there, right? But he didn't sit down and do a budget with me and tell me this is exactly how you do it. He just gave me tips and some tools to point me in the right direction, kind of like we've done today. What really made the true difference was the fact that I knew on a regular basis we were going to sit down and talk about these things, and I just didn't want to show up to coffee and tell him I didn't do any of the things that we had talked about. Right. So there's some accountability there in a partnership where you're walking through this with somebody. And so one of the things that I really advocate people to do, and it's right here on the screen, is find accountability partners to kind of go through a journey with you. You're not going to lean on them forever. But early on, when you're building a new habit and you're changing some behaviors, that stuff is that's kind of, you're getting into now how we are wired, and you're disrupting it, right? So it's going to push back a little bit, and it can be hard to create new habits, and it can be hard to make new changes behaviorally in how we spend. And so if you have someone that you're talking with on a regular basis, I can promise you it's going to go better, and you're going to have better results over time in building these new habits. So I really encourage you, get somebody in your life that you can network with. It doesn't always have to be just about your budget or about money, right? But have some friendships and partnerships along the way that are support structures specifically for these kinds of things that you guys could talk about it. Also, just keep in mind, this takes a while. It's a process to finding the system that's going to work best for you. So I really want to encourage you guys, if you're trying certain things, even these spreadsheets that I gave you, if you're trying them and there are things about them you don't like or not working for you, explore other methods for budgeting. You know, these tools I sent are a great way to help you get started, and they may be all you need. But if they're not, they're at least going to help you get your information organized, and then use what you learned from that to explore other methods of budgeting. But just approach it from kind of a method, or from a place of curiosity, of finding out what works for you. Right? Don't give up. Keep going. Um, to get started, pulling up your bank statements can really help. Also, like I said, maybe postpone setting up a budget by 1 month and spend your first month tracking your expenses so you know what you're typically spending, and use that to create your budget. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way too. And like we talked about, really think about what you need and what you want. There's a difference for sure. And so think about what your goals are for the future. Is 5 days or $5 a day on Starbucks really more worth it than going to Rome at the end of the year, and what you could have gotten by putting that $5 coffee into savings. So ask yourself those kinds of questions. What do you want? And then kind of think about what priorities line up with what you want. At this point, I think we're at a pretty good place to kind of start talking about Q&A and who has questions. So we can kind of start going through questions and talking about that.
Aaron, there's a really good question I noticed in the chat from Sean, who says, are there any apps or digital programs you've either used or can recommend that someone can use for not only budget tracking, but also expenses? And then he
I,
mentioned that Rocket Mortgage has an app.
okay. Yeah. I love the question. 100%. So that kind of goes back to the whole no right or wrong way of doing things, right? For a lot of people, it's better if it can be automated. I have zero issue with that. If you find ways to automate it, that's great. Rocket Money can be a good app for that. There's an unpaid version and a paid version. The unpaid version is pretty good. But obviously it's going to be more robust and more tools available to you through the paid version. I would say start with the unpaid and explore it. And if you want to add to it, you always can. What I like about that, and also you need a budget, is another one. If you do a Google search of you need a budget, it'll help you kind of automate a budget as well as tracking expenses. The pushback I get sometimes from people is that to get any information out of these apps, especially on your spending, you need to give that app your debit card information, credit card information, things like that, right? So that it can be extracting that data and compiling categories of spending and all that, right? Some people are not comfortable giving an app access to their credit card information. I get it. I think that's just kind of a personal call, right? If you're comfortable with that and it's not an issue for you, then yeah, you can get really robust reporting on how you spend, where you spend, when you spend, and really kind of the breakdowns of the specifics. And you can get really granular in what it's telling you, especially through the paid versions. And then you can use that to set up budgets, and even like monitoring, according to your budgets. Like if you're approaching that threshold of what you budgeted for in a specific category, it can give you an alert like, hey, slow down on eating out or something, whatever it is, right? So sorry for the long-winded answer, but yes, there are definitely some good ways to automate this through apps and websites. Did you see any others that we should kind of?
Yeah, there was a question earlier on from Jennifer, I think about how much you should have in your emergency savings.
Mm,
And then she shared that I think she said I have barely 1 month's of bills. So,
mhm.
mhm.
Yeah, so I would start off by encouraging you, Jennifer. You're ahead of the game. Again, kind of like most people I work with not having a budget, most people I work with also are starting off with very little savings if they have any. So having a month of savings is a great starting point. I always try to tell people, do not hate on the humble beginnings, right? Little bits at a time add up, um, so that's great. You're at a good starting point. But I would I would make a goal of growing that a little bit. Um, Typically most professionals are going to tell you it's very ideal to have somewhere between 3 to 6 months of salary replacement in savings. Um, my personal feeling is that it just becomes I feel like it's your call after 3 months. I would really advocate for getting at least 3 months built up. After that, then it becomes debatable, right? Do you feel more secure by continuing to save and building that up to 6 months? Or do you feel like, you know what, 3 months, I'm good. Now I'm gonna start reallocating and shifting these savings toward other goals and maybe investments where they can grow a little bit more aggressively. It's very personal. It depends on how you feel about that. But I would say minimum 3 months is a really good goal.
Great. Danielle has a question. What's the best way to show periodic versus monthly expenses, i.e., like one time a year or quarterly expenses?
Yeah, good question. So in my budget, the way I handle that is like kind of going back to the car insurance example. I'm not paying that every month. At least it's not being billed every month, right? So I take that semi-annual number that I'm paying and break that into a monthly number that I'm setting aside. So as an actual line item in my budget under insurances, there's a line item for car insurance, and it's that monthly number. And for me, I do well with prompts. The less I have to try to mentally keep track of, the better off I'm going to be. So I'll use reminders. So like in my budget, that specific line item is auto, and then it's got the number, how much I'm setting aside, but right next to the auto insurance, I'll have in parentheses the 2 months of the year that gets paid. So there's no surprises, right? Like, so if it's next month, then I'm going to be seeing that in my budget, especially early on in the month as I'm setting things up. And that's a good reminder for me. Like, okay, yeah, I know I've got, 120 a month coming out or whatever it is, specifically for auto insurance that I'm setting into savings. But I also see, yeah, July or June or whenever it is, so it's a good question. There's other ways of handling it, um, but for me, I think it just keeps you out of trouble or from being in a squeeze for money by breaking that down into a monthly number and just pulling that out and setting it on the side, kind of earmarked for that expense. I hope that answers the question.
Great. And then Liana has a question. How effective do you think Dave Ramsey's baby steps are?
Mhm. Um, you know, I like it. Like I said, I really, some people will tell me that, should I even bother saving? Because like really all I can do is $20 a month. Like that's it. That's all I can save realistically. Then save it. Like that, it adds up. Don't hate on these humble beginnings. Start with small goals. That can be a great way to do things. right? Because as you budget and as you get more aware of all these things and really looking at the details, I think one of the things that people commonly find is we have way more control over our finances than it feels like. Like we don't always feel like we have control, and sometimes we can't control all things, but we have more control than we think. So you'll find ways to start getting more aggressive with things, I promise. But in the early rounds of things, and as you're starting this journey, yeah, start small. And having a system is a great idea. Dave Ramsey is one of those guys that I think there's a lot of what he says is very valuable. There's some things I don't agree with, and that's okay, right? No one's gonna always agree with everything I say either. But yeah, having some of these baby step methods or things in place to help you get going, I'm all for it.
I think that's all the questions I see in the chat. But we do have a
Or
few minutes if anyone has one.
I had somebody reach out directly to me. I think they meant to send it into the chat, but I'm happy to bring it up to Aaron for them. So
Okay.
they had asked, I have two savings accounts and a checking for where I keep my money for wants. The one saving is emergency account, and the other I end up needing when unexpected expenses come up. For the ER savings, if it's large, if it's large, do you recommend putting it into a high yield account rather than sitting in a regular account?
I love this question. Yeah, I do. I really do. You've got this money sitting there, and one of uh, one of my past positions, I was like mid-level management with a large bank, and so I can tell you the industry average for banks on savings accounts is 0.02%. That's what they're paying you in interest. It's nothing, right? You get a couple pennies for every couple $1,000. So, I love the idea of high yield savings or money market accounts as an alternative to traditional savings. Um, both of them are really good. There are some strategies on how you might want to think about which one to go with and when. Here are the pros of high yield savings or money market accounts. These are FDIC insured, just like a traditional savings account. So this is not an investment where you're risking the money you put in. Um, the interest rates on the low end are typically going to be in the ballpark of 3.5%. On the high end, sometimes around 5%. I think right now the highest I've seen recently was a money market account that was 4.74%. So they move a little bit, they're not fixed. But and you're not going to get rich on 3.5 to 5%. But compared to 0.02%, and it's sitting there anyway, that's great. It's a great alternative. A good way to shop it is do a Google search of high yield savings, best high yield savings accounts, best money market accounts. Those will typically yield some usual suspects in the search results. NerdWallet, Bankrate, and Best Money. Those are some good resources. I like them because I know that they're vetting what they list as their kind of top picks. It's also getting updated pretty recently or pretty frequently. You'll see those things change and update pretty much on a weekly basis. So any one of those I trust is some pretty good resources. And it's nice because they'll stack their top picks kind of side by side. So you can really compare apples to apples with those. Um, but just know that, there can be kind of different approaches to right now, high yield savings accounts, the yield on those has gone down a little bit because they correlate directly to the federal interest rate. So that was good for mortgage loans, right? When the federal rate came down a little bit, not so good for high yield savings accounts. Money market accounts have an inverse relationship. So when the federal rate came down, money market rates went up a little bit. So, um, so something to look at. Um, I don't see a huge margin between the two right now anyway, but some of the higher interest rates right now that I'm seeing are high yield savings, or I'm sorry, money market. This is a long answer and I apologize. With that said, there's one caveat or asterisk I would put on this. Typically, with most banks, getting access to funds that are in high yield savings or money market, you're usually going to have a 24-hour kind of processing time between requesting the funds and then being available. So if it's emergency savings, that's not too long of a time, but I would have a little bit, and this is what I do. My emergency money is in right now a money market account, but I still take a couple $1,000s and leave it in traditional savings, because if I need new tires today, then that I have a couple thousand that's just in a regular savings account that I can go get. So great question. I love it. I hope that helps.
That was really helpful, Aaron. I know we are at time, but there was one question about using CDs as well.
Yep. So again, that's a great option. The one thing I will throw at you with CDs is just that I wouldn't put money that you think you might need anytime soon into a CD, because those come with a maturity date, right? And if you pull that money out of a CD prior to the maturity date, then you're not getting any of that interest. So just something to keep in mind. The maturity dates, there's a range, right? They're as short as 3 months all the way out to a couple years. So just be aware of when those mature, and not counting on needing access to that money once it goes into a CD.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. I think that wraps up our Q&A.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I wish you all the best in the rest of this series. I know that you're going to be in very, very good hands with the future speakers they have lined up.
Man.
Great.
Thank you so much, Aaron. This was awesome.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. We appreciate it. And we hope to see everybody at our future sessions that are going to be focused on retirement and the basics to investing.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, everyone.